Welcome to another episode of JTV in this brave new world that we're living in, where we're ending up doing so many of our interviews and our content virtually online, having conversation with people. But in a sense, I'm kind of happy that we at least have the opportunity to do these things. And I think maybe there are some interviews and discussions that I think might not have been had with people, because I would have probably preferred to just only do it when I'm in person and film it in person. And the fact that everyone's now doing video conferencing for discussions, it's making this more normal and actually creating some opportunities to have some conversations with some people that I really want to speak to. And I can't think of anyone that I'm more excited to be speaking to right now than Rabbi David Fohrman, who Rabbi, I just want to, first of all, welcome to the program and thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's great to be here with you.
And you're currently in America right now on the East Coast.
That's
but
correct.
I just want to first of all take this moment just to express my gratitude and appreciation to you for, you have a fantastic online website called Aleph Beta, as well as have written some phenomenal books that really delve into understanding and questioning, the narratives within the Torah, within key Jewish stories, and you have so deeply enhanced my appreciation and understanding of Torah. And I just want to first just take this opportunity just to thank you so much for really enhancing my Jewish spiritual life understanding journey. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, and it means a lot to hear you say that, and to be able to contribute that kind of understanding to folks out there. So thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here again.
Well, really, I mean every word that I say, and I strongly encourage you, if you haven't been on the website yet, check out alephbeta.org. It is a phenomenal website. And so the first thing I want to ask...
An easy way to remember it, by the way, for an easy way to get there is ab.video, but just type that into your browser. Folks have a hard time sometimes with Aleph Beta, can't figure out if it's Aleph Beta, Alpha Beta, right? So ab.video is just an easy way to get there.
ab.video, okay, fantastic. And there's very few channels that I would say if you had to pick between watching JTV or something else, watch something else. But I would say that with Aleph Beta, it's so brilliant. So I'm asking this to really every guest that I have on the program, which is that, the world has really changed a lot in the past few weeks. And I want to know, as a Jewish educator and someone who has a lot of profound things to say and thinks in a very profound way, what is at the forefront of your mind right now?
Let's see. First of all, just in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It would be nice to say that at the forefront of my mind is all sorts of wonderful philosophical speculations and great wisdom insights, but I am in the center of things. New York is right in the middle of the East Coast. Has been hit pretty hard by the coronavirus. Nassau County has been hit doubly as hard as Manhattan, which is where I am. The forefront of my mind is really just keeping our family safe, and the vulnerable people in my family, especially. That's the honest truth.
So then what's at the back of your mind?
In the back of my mind. The other things in my mind are, first of all, you mentioned that the world has changed so much. I think that's kind of a humbling thing. I remember reading a bit of The Black Swan. The Black Swan has, I think, entered the vernacular, but it was coined. I don't know if it was coined by the author of The Black Swan, but basically the Black Swan event, of course, is that every once in a while there is a black swan, and it strikes people as a remarkable, unprecedented thing, but it's just part of reality. Nothing to me is more chilling than the Bill Gates interview from 2015, where I don't know if you've seen it, Ollie, but where he talks
the TED
about
speech.
A pandemic of a coronavirus being essentially 50-50 odds in his lifetime, and for a mere $10 billion, which feels like pocket change now for the world economy, the world could be prepared for that, but instead we're investing in yesterday's threats. which is in yesterday's threats, which is the the threat of nuclear Armageddon, which is always out there, but it's yesterday's threat, and I think that it's always easier to be reactive than to be proactive. I think we see that in governmental responses, certainly in America and in England, where you and I live. I think Israel has been one of the most proactive countries in dealing with this, and I give the government there a lot of respect for what it is that they're doing and how they're handling it, together with the Mossad. But I think that one of the things that people need to do in order to be able to maintain a proactive response is not to succumb to the black swan illusion, which is to say that the consciousness that life can change dramatically is not something that comes easily to us. We are lulled into a certain kind of complacency that, because things have always gone a certain way, they will. And I think, no one could imagine the kind of world we're living in. If you could take a snapshot of any aspect of the world, empty airports, gyms that are closed, economies that are closed, people not walking in the streets, empty plazas, right? All of that would have seemed, so strange. And yet, I think that a key sort of basis point that we need to be able to get to respond proactively is to not take our current reality for granted, and not to take the things that we have for granted, and to understand that it all can change quickly. So to me, that's kind of one of the things that's in the forefront of my mind, which is appreciating, and that goes for a lot of things. I think spiritually, there's a lot of aspects of that too, right? Which is that it's always human nature to take what you have for granted and then to wonder about something else. But if you think about the kinds of things that we still have that we take for granted, family, the family that we're quarantining with, those social bonds are so important and can't be taken for granted. Health, to the extent that we still have it, can't be taken for granted. Shelter, food, I mean, just the basics, right, are things to rejoice in. And I think a kind of getting back to basics and rejoicing in those basics there's something sweet about that, about not taking that for granted. I think in my own experience, the experience of letting go of household help and coming together as a family and just navigating the new normal and disinfecting groceries and keeping a house up and caring for those who are in other places, and just banding together as a family to help others and help ourselves is also not something to be taken for granted. There's a certain kind of sweetness in those interpersonal bonds of just simply getting back to basics that's wonderful. And I think anybody this year, from your Jewish listeners or non-Jews who celebrate a Seder and have a very different Seder, a much more basic Seder on plastic, but with just family around and no guests. And on the one hand, you can decry that as what a great tragedy, but it's sweet and it's back to basics. And I think a lot of people had the best Seder they've ever had in years in being able to just cut away anything extraneous and be able to revel and rejoice in the little things. So those are some of the thoughts in the back of my mind.
One thing my brother actually mentioned to me was that he said it feels slightly, I wouldn't say eerie, but there were a lot of people that sadly were alone during their Seder meals because of the current situation. And I think it's perhaps too. It felt a little bit tenuous, but he said it is quite interesting that you have in the Torah itself narrative people that can't celebrate Passover or give the Passover offering, the Korban Pesach, because they had some kind of disease and it was a contagious disease, and therefore they had to be outside the camp. I wondered if you just saw any. Have you thought about that kind of parallel at all? Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. You're talking about Pesach Sheni and the people who are Tmei L'Nefesh Adam, people who have been in contact with a dead person and therefore are not in position to celebrate Passover at its normal time. It's pushed off by a month, and so yeah, that is kind of interesting, and it feels like sometimes Passover comes at an inopportune time, and there's a chance to make it up. At least in the Torah, there's this notion of Pesach Sheni, a month later, the ability to offer a replacement Korban Pesach. For some of us, in the thick of things, it would have been nice to have an extra month. So yes, I guess there's some thoughts of that. But as for folks celebrating Seder alone, that was, my mom was one of them. The family banded together and created a special Haggadah for her with pictures and little commentary and notes. And I think that was nice. Yeah, so that's tough. But again, that too is something which the Gemara, the Talmud anticipates, talks about what it's like. The Talmud specifically addresses somebody running a Seder alone and says that you ask yourself the 4 questions and you keep up the Socratic question and answer kind of dialogue yourself. And, there's something I think interesting and meditative about that. I remember I got a chance to work with Natan Sharansky a few years back. And, I always marveled at his strength, of course, for being able to persevere in isolation in the Gulag for many years. And he did it, through certain meditative techniques, playing chess with himself. And if you think about the notion of playing chess with yourself, it means being able to occupy the white side and then transfer to the black side, and then transfer to the white side and transfer to the black side. And that sort of meditative aspect of being able to occupy more than one space in your mind, to be able to, is might be a kind of key out of the torture of isolation. If you think about what the Gemara talks about, is that you ask yourself questions. It's very similar to playing chess with yourself. It's occupying the other side of a debate, right? Where you can be the questioner and then be the answerer and then be the questioner. And maybe the reason why that's a key out of isolation is because, one of the sad foibles of human nature is that we get stuck in our own perspective. And we lounge into a certain kind of narcissistic self-indulgence where we see things the way we've always seen them before. We retreat into our little bubble. If we watch CNBC or we watch Fox News or whatever it is we watch, and we have our view, and that's the way we see things. And we aren't really so open to an outside view. We're willing to parry it, but we're not really willing to listen. We're not really willing to jump over to the other side of the fence and occupy that other vision and argue for it. And maybe that works, and we can get by in normal life when we have contact with other people. So we can sort of get by, and others to some extent provide a little bit of a counterpoint for us. But maybe there's something meaningful about what the rabbis say, that when you're alone, the way you respond to being alone is you ask yourself questions and then you give the answers, and you ask yourself questions and then you give the answers. Or as Sharansky would say, you play chess with yourself. And the ultimate victory over being alone is not to simply represent your own view, but to imagine another view and to argue for it, and then to come back to your view and imagine another view. And in that way, maybe there's a kind of victory over isolation.
Do you think it's good to be? It's a sign of someone that's worked on himself, at peace with himself, that they can be comfortable being alone? Or do you think ultimately we are social beings, and we need other people?
I mean, first of all, I do think we're social beings, and I do think we need other people. Interestingly, I think nevertheless, somebody who's alone has to figure out a way to deal with that, right? If society places you, or if circumstances place you in a situation where you're alone, I think we have to compensate by mimicking artificially, uh, what mimicking artificially the other person, which is where I'm coming from in the chess analogy, or in the asking yourself questions. There is this theme, in Hasidic thought, and Musar thought talks about hitbodedut, the sort of virtues of being alone. And I think there is a place for being alone in the world. I think that, in other words, the way you phrase that question is, do we need others? And
Well, of course we need others. What I mean,
right.
it's I really
Well, I
phrase it
think the
the wrong
question,
way.
what I mean by that is need is a slippery word.
Yeah.
Of course, we do need others in ways, but I think the most powerful way we need others is in a way to reach out to others and to be able to give to them, to be with others and to be able to connect to them, not necessarily for our own needs, but what we can give to them, I think is a powerful therapeutic. It does more for us in a way than it does for them. And I think it's one of the deepest ways we need others, ironically, is when we don't really need them, when we're reaching out to them and being able to give to them.
Right.
And one of the most painful things about isolation is not being able to do that. I mean, I even know my mom, who's isolated now. I went to visit her last night, and my mom has been, making soup for our family, and she put some soup pots out on the deck chairs and retreated back into her house. And I went and got from the deck chairs, and to her, that's very powerful, right? To be able to give to another family is a way to connect. So I think it's one of the deepest ways we connect is by being able to give.
I think where I was coming from was that I've heard people say, and self-help people say, if you're not comfortable being just with yourself and with your thoughts, maybe not eternally, but from time to time, then you need to, there's something not quite in balance with you.
Yeah, you were breaking up there. I didn't catch the rest of that sentence. Certainly, I think that's right. I think that's true. I mean, I think, Eric Fromm talks about this, where he talks about, the notion of love. And he says that if you're in a needy state where you need others to fill holes inside your own sense of self, you aren't really capable of love. And love begins with a certain kind of self-sufficiency. And that self-sufficiency, one way to express it is the ability to be alone and be okay with it. And then there's another level, which is, now that I can be alone, I can reach out to others and have the joy of connection with them by reaching out from a place, ironically, where I'm okay being alone, and yet there's something I can give to you by reaching out. But certainly the notion of being okay being alone is not something to take for granted. I myself struggle with it. I find myself to be a news junkie sometimes, and with the ubiquity of a smartphone, the ability to listen to a podcast or to check Twitter becomes addictive at a certain point. And I wonder whether a lot of that is, in a deep kind of way, coming with a discomfort of being alone, right? Why do you have to always listen to a podcast? Why do you have to always check Twitter if you find yourself alone for a few minutes? And right, because it feels uncomfortable to just be on a long walk with your thoughts with no other distractions. But I agree with you that is a needed salve for our lives, and we have to cultivate that ability.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on something that you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, which was that you said people like Natan Sharansky and others who dealt with isolation was to try and see things from other people's perspectives and challenge your own thoughts, your own preconceptions of things. And this is something that I think you do quite a lot of when you analyze different Torah narratives, and you try to help us understand sometimes some of the characters in the Torah who do bad things, or who we might even consider to be bad people. Certainly help us try to understand where the brothers were coming from when they did something to Joseph, where Ishmael was coming from because he felt hard done by. And I just wondered, I think we even touched on this in our last interview that we did when we were together in person. I think it's fascinating to look at the reasons why people do things. I think there is even a midrash, a Torah commentary that I think it writes a letter on behalf of, maybe it's Pharaoh or Haman, where he explains why he feels the way he does towards the Jews. I can't remember what it was, but I just wondered, how do you get the balance between, and this doesn't just apply to Torah characters, but also in life, how do you get the balance between understanding where someone comes from and eventually making a judgment on the way someone acted, or even sometimes who someone is? To say that was bad, that was evil, or you are evil because you did that. Ultimately, I understand where you came from, but ultimately that's who you are. How do you get that balance? And by the way, I was even discussing this with a friend of mine, because there was someone within the Jewish community who did something very bad, and a rabbi of mine who I really respect. And I've always been taught to think that we should judge. We're told to judge people favorably, but he did something really, really bad, and the rabbi said, "This is, this is not a good person." And I was thinking, again, hold on. I thought we're not. Are we allowed to make judgments on someone? Are we not allowed to make judgments on someone? Can we just, judge their actions? But should we try to understand where they're coming from? I think you understand where I'm getting at with this. How do you get that balance right?
Well, one of the interesting things I think is that if you look at, I think to some extent we could take a lead from the Torah itself, which is, how often do you, and let me ask you this question, Ollie, how often do you find, just in the 5 books of Moses, from whatever knowledge you have of the 5 books of Moses, how often do you find the Torah overtly making value judgments about people, right? Letting you know that the Torah thinks a person is bad, categorizing a person as evil. Can you name an example, right? Does that happen a lot in the Torah? Does it happen a little bit in the Torah? Does it happen at all in the Torah? What would you say?
I can think of many times where actions are called bad or evil, but I can't think of a time where a person is called evil.
Right. I can't even think of it either. Now, it's true that the rabbis later on commenting will attach that designation to certain people. They will talk about Bilam Harasha, right, or something like that, the Bilam, the evil prophet, or something. But the Torah notably doesn't, right? The Torah doesn't attach that, even though Bilam is clearly an enemy, or becomes an enemy of the Jews in terms of his actions. The Torah is very careful about not attaching that designation. Similarly with Esav, Esav is one of those characters that really that can rile us up. But if you look at the text is very careful about not labeling these people for someone. And I think, part of that is that in as much as the Torah is trying to teach us how to act, I think one way to think about the balance you're talking about, and I think there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot to this effect too, at least the way I understand the Mishnah. But I'll get to the Mishnah in a moment if you like. But basically, I think the way the Torah sets things up is there is a judge in the world, and therefore there are, we can't just simply take the moral relativistic position that I'm okay, you're okay, everything is fine. There are absolute standards of behavior, and there is a judge in the world, but we are not that judge, right? God is the judge. So part of the balance is understanding that there are absolute values and absolute values to which we are held, but we are not those who hold others to them. God is the one who holds others to them. And therefore the Torah, in teaching us how to act, basically saying it isn't your job to try to decide who the evil person here is and who the righteous person is. God's a big boy and he can figure that out, right? Your job is to
we can't ever do that.
And to ask yourself, what is it that you can learn from these other folks' behavior? And if you think about, literature, whether that literature is history or whether that literature is fiction, it doesn't really matter. But one of the great benefits of reading literature, including the Bible, which is a kind of literature, is to be able to have the benefit of learning from others' experiences, right? We don't have to make the same mistakes as others because we get to read about them. And what's interesting about fiction is that what good fiction tries to do is also not label things. Good fiction will not label a character, but will draw you into their world, help you understand how they made choices, help you understand perhaps how they deceived themselves, help you understand the dynamics of how bad choices got made, while giving you some sympathy for that character. And I think what that really does is it is able to, again, it's that same Natan Sharansky dynamic of playing white and playing black. If I'm Ollie and I'm reading about some character, Holden Caulfield, and to The Catcher in the Rye, or whatever character that is. So I'm playing black, right? I'm Ollie Anisfeld. I'm David Fohrman. I'm viewing this character from the outside. The challenge of the author is to say, no, it's not enough for you to play black. I want you to play white. Now understand what it's like to be Holden Caulfield from the inside. Can I make this character sympathetic enough while still making him flawed enough that I can draw you into his world and understand why he would act this kind of way? And then you can come back to being David Fohrman and make and look at it from the outside, but then you can look at it from the inside. And it's that kind of dynamic through which real learning comes from. Therefore, I think if we're reading the Bible, one of the most valuable tools that we can use, in addition to just being a careful reader and noticing things in the text and textual anomalies and all the other things that I try to do when I read the Bible. But in addition to all of that, one of the great, most powerful things we can do is to sort of consciously put ourselves in the shoes of another character and ask ourselves, let me not look at her or him as me. Let me look at her or him as them, and then read the story as them, and ask myself how the story seems a little bit different as them than as David Fohrman. And you can, it's Pesach time right now. You can try this at home. Try this with Pharaoh. Try this with Miriam. And you'll find fascinating things come up, right? And here is Pharaoh, who's the architect, arguably, of the first genocide in history, throwing little babies in the Nile in an attempt to cull the herd, an attempt to minimize, Israelite population. And ask yourself, where is he coming from, and what leads him to this monstrosity? Is it that he's inherently a monster? And if you look at where the Torah is coming from, the Torah actually gives you something of his motivation. It's really interesting to put yourself in Pharaoh's shoes, which is Pharaoh becomes paranoid about a population explosion of a benign sector of the population that are immigrants, essentially, that are Gerim in the land, which is us, and we become too numerous, and all of a sudden Pharaoh is worried about war and worried about what might be, and there's very little reason to be worried other than this scary population explosion and the mind games of what might be, what might be, what might be. And suddenly Pharaoh's dehumanizing and sort of proactively treating this population as an enemy without the slightest provocation. And it tells you that's how people can behave. And it's a scary kind of thing. And you occupy his shoes and see how easy it is to go down that path. Miriam, it's such a, for the first time, I think I began to understand Miriam a little bit more this year just by doing that. I mean, Miriam's name, if you had to take Miriam's name apart into two words, Ollie, right? What does her name kind of sound like?
Miriam, maybe bitter waters, bitter sea.
Bitter waters, vast waters that are bitter. Now, why do you and why do you think Miriam of all people might have that name? Think about her experience from the inside. Why would she be called bitter vast waters?
It's because she was born at a time of genocide where the Jewish
what was
people
the
were
instrument of genocide?
drowning baby Jewish boys.
And what do we know about Miriam? Miriam has this little brother, Moses, and the mother tries to hide Moses for 3 months until she just can't do it anymore. And put yourself in the mother's shoes. What would it be like to be her, to try to keep your child silent, but after 3 months you realize you just can't do it anymore? The stormtroopers are at the door. The Gestapo's coming. They know there's a baby there. You can't keep him safe. So then you put him in this little box by the Nile. Ollie, what are the chances that, you don't know the end of the story. What are the chances that in that environment that the child survives in that little box in the bulrushes,
Close to
right?
zero. Close to zero.
Vanishingly close to zero.
Yeah.
So when you're putting that box there, it's not a little boat that's going to miraculously save the child. It's probably a coffin that the mother is like, at least he should have some burial. It's the bitterest moment, right? And if you think about the word bitter, the word bitter is the word that the Torah uses to describe the slavery experience, right? Vayimararu et chayehem ba'avodat kasha. They embittered their lives. And it began with slavery, but then there was genocide. But with the genocide, interestingly enough, guess who survived? It was always the girls. And God said that Pharaoh says that kill the boys, the kol imbati v'chaya. But if it's a daughter, then she lives. Now, what's it like to be the daughter who lives? Vayimaru et chayehen, bitter chai, and then there's the daughter who's chai. The daughter becomes the bitter one, right? If I'm the girl and my brothers have been wiped out in the Nile, and I'm the mother, right? The evil genius of Pharaoh is, if you think about it, it's crazy. If I'm Pharaoh, why am I killing females? I should be killing males if I'm worried about the population explosion. Why am I killing males? I should be killing females if I'm worried about the population explosion. If I call the females, then they can't reproduce. Why am I killing the males? The answer is he's trying to embitter the females, right? Imbati v'chaya. The bittersweet truth for every female is I live, but at what price? And the survivor's guilt of watching the little baby boys drown in the Nile is enough to destroy fertility. Who's going to have babies in a world like that? And the nation stops. And that was Pharaoh's genius. And here is Miriam, who's the one person who succeeds, the one person who at that moment that the mother places her in the Nile, nobody looked at that child except for one person, and it was Miriam. She stands from afar to see what's going to be with that child, which means that she still had some hope. But what an act of courage that took. As she scanned the steel gray, waters of the Nile, right, and without knowing the ending of the story, watching the daughter of Pharaoh approach, Hitler's daughter, the worst person in the world who could approach at that moment, what would you have thought about those waters that are about to swallow your child, your brother alive? They're the bitterest waters in the world, this big, vast reservoir of bitter waters. That's Miriam, right? But she's the one who succeeds, right? Who beats back the bitter waters, who stands and watches anyway and becomes the instrument of salvation and helps save her brother. But so I think it always pays to be able to occupy, the get out of yourself and say, what is it like to be this person?
But what notion of Miriam were you saying we had that you're challenging?
What's that?
What notion of Miriam are you challenging that we had?
If you don't do this, right? So you can read the story without putting yourself in Miriam's shoes. Say, oh, Miriam, cute little girl, hung out by the Nile, made friends with the daughter of Pharaoh, ends up singing the song at the sea. She's a great singer. She's a bit player. She's the sister of Moshe. Without really, again, it's different seeing Miriam from the outside. She's much more of a two-dimensional figure. Miriam from the inside is much more of a bittersweet figure. She's much more real. So I'm just saying that, and I think that's true in general. When we see people from the outside, they tend to be two-dimensional. They begin to become three-dimensional when I'm willing to get out of my skin and ask myself, what is it like to be them?
And do you think there are times when, if you go into the three-dimensional understanding of a person, that our value judgment on who they are, or even their actions, can be radically changed in the Torah?
Yeah, and I think what the Torah is saying is, before you start judging, seek to understand, right? It's the Stephen Covey principles. First seek to understand, then to be understood, right? So when I do that in any conversation, any attempt to understand, right, I need to understand your experience before I can come back to me and seek to make sense of it and seek to impose anything upon it. And so
But it doesn't mean we can't make value
yeah,
judgments
I
on
mean,
actions.
if you look at what's that?
But it doesn't mean that we can't, at the end of the day, make, even once we understand all the dimensions, it doesn't mean we can't make value judgments on people's actions at the end of the
No, and I
day.
think in a certain way, but the value judgments become more meaningful, right?
Right,
It's one thing to have a two-dimensional picture of Pharaoh and call him a monster.
right,
That's not very helpful. It
right,
doesn't teach us much.
right,
It just says, "Yay, we're on the Jews team.
right,
Pharaoh's on the blue team, and I'm on the yellow team,
right,
and he's evil." Right? It's like Darth Vader. Right? You know he's bad because he's wearing black. Yeah, great, excellent. He's wearing black the first time I see him, and Princess Leia's wearing white. I guess I'm on the white team. What about Darth Vader makes him bad? What about Princess Leia makes her good? It's two-dimensional characters. All I'm doing is playing with herd mentality and saying, this is my team. I'm going to root for my team. Whereas if you come in and you say, okay, so here's what makes Darth Vader Darth Vader, right? And now I have some understanding from the inside, and he's evil. And look at this monstrous things that he did, but look at how he got there. So then I can learn something from it. Because I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of making value judgments, right? There's two possibilities, right? One point is because I am the judge and the jury, and it is my job in the world to condemn people or to celebrate them, right? Because it is me who is the judge. And I think the Torah basically says, and again, that's that Mishnah that it's a fascinating Mishnah. I'll show it to you in a moment. But I think the Torah's position is that's not true. You aren't the judge and the jury, right? God is the judge and the jury. So then the question is, okay, so then why should I be making value judgments? And I think the answer is because I learn from them, right? Because if I'm able to say, whoa, stepping outside, if I play black, in other words, if I'm David Fohrman and I see what Pharaoh does, you just did this monstrous thing, right? Now I occupy Pharaoh's position and I say, oh, well, Pharaoh thinks he's looking out for his country's national security and he became paranoid. But now playing David Fohrman, look at this monstrous thing that he did. That dynamic of going from black to white, black to white, black to white allows me to make a value judgment that teaches me something, which teaches me, look how easy it is to play the national security card and to end up using that ultimately as a paper tiger excuse for becoming a monster.
right.
And now I've learned something, right? But if I never engage in the black, white exercise, I can never learn that.
Right. I wasn't saying it so much as about making value judgments, saying that it's useful in order to be judge and jury, or even just to learn lessons. The reason why I was asking, is it necessary, is because sometimes in life, when you have relationships with people, especially close relationships, sometimes when you need to decide, is this someone that I need to step away from a little bit, or I need to get closer to, or I need to understand more, or I need to protect myself more. It's all very well understanding where someone's coming from, and that can certainly help in a relationship. But I feel like sometimes you need to be able to say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what you did was understandable, and I made a mistake, or what you did was unfair to me, And so I feel like for personal relationships, it's helpful.
Yes. I think you're exactly right. I think the one exception to the rule that I just discussed with you is your own personal relationships, which, by the way, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which I keep on referring to,
but not revealing,
makes that exception.
So
right?
What is it?
I'll show you the Mishnah.
Okay.
Let me see if I can call it up on Svaria for a moment. Avot 1. Yeah, so I think it's 5 here. No, really, yeah.
Is it about putting yourself in someone else's shoes?
Yeah, so it's Mishnah 1, it's chapter 1, Mishnah 6 and 7, right? So if you look at the Mishnah and really read it through, it's all of these issues. Yoshua ben Prachia v'nitai rabbeili kiblu mem. Yoshua ben Prachia omer. Joshua ben Prachia says, Aseh lecha rav u'knei lecha chaver v'vidanat kol adam l'kach zchut. Make for yourself a mentor, connect, acquire for yourself a friend.
Hmm.
Davidan ad kol adam l'kaf, right? And judge everyone favorably.
Hmm.
Um, the way I see that Mishnah is a certain kind of triangle, almost envision a right triangle. I'm at the base of a right triangle. If I look at my friend is horizontally oriented towards me. He's over here. If I look at my mentor, he's vertically oriented. He's up here. And together, this makes a right triangle. Now, the hypotenuse, right, this line over here, is everybody else, right? Havidanat kol adam l'kaf. Let judge everybody else favorably. But perhaps the two exceptions to judge everybody favorably are two very important people in the world. And those two important people are your mentor and your friend, right? Because your mentor and your friend, you can't afford to occupy this. In other words, you are not the judge and the jury. You're not. God is the judge and the jury. Nevertheless, and I can't really judge anybody. Nevertheless, I have a personal interest in making sure that because I'm going to be influenced by my friends and mentors, and I'm forced into a position of judging them, right? So you always have to ask yourself about your mentor. Is this the kind of person I want as a mentor? And
Wow.
yes, I can't really understand him until I'm in his shoes. And yes, in the ultimate view of things, God is the judge. But I can't afford to be in the thrall of a mentor that's going to lead me astray. And therefore, I have to protect myself, right? And I have to make judgments, ironically, about my mentor, which is actually the opposite of what most people think about their mentors. Most people think, this is my mentor, I can't judge them, they're my mentor. Whatever they tell me, I can do. I think the Mishnah is saying the exact opposite. If they're your mentor, they're the one person you have to judge. They're the person you always have to ask yourself, is this the kind of person I want to be emulating? And you have to ask yourself, who do I want as my mentor? Who do I want to really emulate? And therefore choose your mentor and figure it out carefully. Similarly with your friend. With your friend, he's the one person you have to ask, who do I want to be friends with? And if their actions seem sketchy, then it's time to look elsewhere for a friend.
Isn't it
So
surprising that it doesn't
those are
mention?
exceptions.
Isn't it surprising it doesn't mention spouse or parents?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, right? Maybe because if you think about it, well, first of all, spouse might be friend,
Okay.
right, in a certain kind of way. So I'm not sure spouse isn't mentioned, but parents aren't. And maybe the answer there is that parents are the one people you can't divorce, right? I can get rid of a mentor, I can get rid of a friend or even a spouse, but I can't get rid of parents. And therefore, even if your parents are bad apples, right? The I can't resort to I can't resort to it to completely excluding them from my life, and therefore, right, and therefore, I in the end of the day, I have to learn how to deal with them, and yeah, but so anyway, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in the Mishnah.
That's really, really fascinating. Let's just touch on one separate area, which I guess is probably quite relevant because people have a sense that they have more time now, maybe a bit more time for self-reflection, meditation, prayer, which is a topic of Jewish prayer itself. I know Aleph Beta, your website, recently came out with a great series which delved into a segment of the morning prayer service. And I want to, completely level with you. I really have a tough time with the Jewish textual prayer service. Not because I don't. I'm largely, probably 90% just. It's down to me being guilty of not having studied it enough and understood what really, what's being said, getting a real understanding of it. But I think also just the very mechanism of having a lot of words to say, in a sense of I don't have, and feeling like, I've got other things to do in my day, I can't spend too much time on this. I find that challenging. Maybe I'm also a bit of a fidgety character and I'm not maybe being enough self-disciplined enough. And it's certainly true that when I maybe do try and discipline myself a bit more and try and understand what I'm saying, also it's harder when Hebrew isn't your first language. But I guess if you do try and invest a bit more time, then there's a bit more to get out of it. But I would say that, I think, if you do try and invest a bit more time, then there's a bit more to get out of it. But I would say that, if you do try and invest a bit more time, then there's a bit more to get out of it. But I would say that, if you do try and invest a bit more time, then there's a bit more to get out of it. But if I look at, say, a gospel church and I listen to some of their music and the way they're speaking in a language everyone understands and speaking simply, and the language they're speaking is more maybe spontaneous and it feels more from the heart, I can instantly just see why that moves people. And it really, it connects
Yeah,
with
you
people.
just cut out there, so you have to repeat. You,
Where did I get up to?
no, you got up to the gospel church.
Yeah, so I said when I look at a gospel church or like gospel music, people are they're talking in a language they understand very simply. It's from the heart. The music is compelling. It's emotional. It's emotive. And for me, I sometimes even I try to avoid some of the when they reference their specific deity. But some of that music I find just so incredibly uplifting, and it instantly brings me into a sense of sort of spirituality and it's nothing to do with their theology per se. It's just the music itself, maybe the setup. It feels more communal. The services, everyone's engaged more. Everyone feels more vulnerable, and I would never question the wisdom of our sages in terms of what the prayer setup that they've created. But I really struggle with it, and I just wanted to know your reflections on that, whether there is some room for innovation, and what your recommendation would be for getting the most out of the Jewish prayers. Because I know there is, unlimited depth and wisdom to what we're saying, but I struggle with it.
Sure. Yeah. And this is something which I mentioned at the beginning of that series on prayer. So for all your listeners out there, if you want to check it out, it's there at ab.video, aleph-beta.org. I think it was titled something about the meaning of the morning prayers. But yeah, it's definitely an issue. I mean, I guess a couple pieces of advice that I would offer is the following. Even the rabbis who coined this terminology, I think what they were trying to do is create a framework, but the framework wasn't the be all and end all. A lot of times, one of the things that trip us up in Judaism is mistaking frameworks, skeletons, for being the be all and end all, and not understanding that there's flesh to be put on the bones. So, for example, the entire framework of halacha, the entire framework of mitzvot, it is a framework. It's nothing more than a skeleton. The 600, right? If you say, what does it mean to be a good person? If I keep all the commandments, am I a good person? I think the answer is flatly no. If all you do is keep the commandments, you're not a good person. The commandments are a skeleton. You are nothing but a skeleton. That's all you are, right? You're just a walking skeleton. You have to put flesh on those bones, which is that, and the Mesilas Yesharim talks about this, the great ethical work of Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, where he talks about what a chassid is. And he really says what a chassid is somebody who is able to be very sensitive to another person and to be able to kind of pick up on their desires by sort of nonverbal cues, and to be able to know enough about them, to be able to know what it is that they want, and to be able to go above and beyond the letter of the law, or above and beyond the letter of what it is that they've told you, to be able to, and general ethos and their general state of mind, and to be reactive to that. That's what a chassid is with another person. And that's what a chassid is with God. And that's what Shara Hasidut with him is all about. It's not about jumping into a cold mikveh, he says, and thinking, what chumrah can I put upon myself? But it's trying to understand, where are these laws taking me? What are the ethical messages which are coming across, from which I can divine where the Torah kind of wants me to go? What are the meat that I can put on the bones? So I think that's true with halacha, and I think it's true with prayer. I think the sages never designed prayer as a be-all and end-all. They designed it as a framework. And there's many statements that the rabbis make about prayer that speak to that. For example, you're allowed to pray in any language. If you can't understand the Hebrew, translate it. You're allowed and encouraged to add your own words to prayer. It's a framework because a lot of people find themselves speechless, right? The same reason why, and I'll give you another framework that we're all used to. I want to write something tender to my wife. Why is there a multi-billion-dollar industry called greeting cards, Hallmark cards, right? What's a Hallmark card? But if I buy a Hallmark card, right, and I do nothing but sign my name, no matter how beautiful my wife isn't going to be that impressed. I just bought her a card, right? But if I use the card as inspiration, I say, you know what? I really didn't know what to say, but this poem strikes something in me, honey. And I write a few lines underneath the poem that maybe isn't quite as poetic as the poem, but this is what it inspires in me. Then my wife is touched by that. That means something. And I used the words as a framework. And I think that's what we're supposed to do in prayer too. If you can use those words as a framework and say, okay, but now let me say something else, God, right? Here's what I'm thinking about these words right now, and I want to talk to you. That's a more meaningful prayer, right? And I think the sages are asking that from us, and even in the holiest prayers of all, in the Shemona Esrei, where you're not supposed to interrupt, you're not supposed to talk to anybody, you can say whatever you want in whatever language you want, and include that in Shemona Esrei, and that's not a desecration of the prayer. That's an elevation of the prayer. So that's the first thing that I would say. And the second thing I'd say is, and you can, and for inspiration, feel free to, we have some Aleph Beta videos on prayer, can use those, but use those again to begin to inspire your own thoughts and to enliven your own thoughts with prayer. And getting back to the gospel church, it's true. One of the things I think we can learn from the Christians, from the Southern Baptists, to some extent, is the power of music. It's not just in the Southern Baptist tradition, it's in the Hasidic tradition, and it's there, and it's one of the powerful parts of Hasidus. Speaking personally, my own parents were early followers of Shlomo Carlebach, and my father was one of the guys who met Shlomo Carlebach back at the Berkeley Folk Festival, and I think it was 1967 when and Shlomo then had universal appeal. And I remember growing up in the House of Love and Prayer in San Francisco as a little kid, 4 years old, kind of listening to those songs. And whether you're a fan of Shlomo Carlebach or not, his music is often deeply touching and offers great windows into prayer. And I think one of the things that I would suggest is for folks, and one of the things you can do in COVID-19 land, when people are no longer praying in a minyan and are praying by themselves, that offers you opportunities, right? You don't have to conform as much to what everybody else is doing. You can do things a little differently. So if you want to invest another 5 minutes in prayers every morning, find yourself a quiet room and sing a piece of it, and come up with your own tune. Sing one of the tunes that are there. Many of these words are set to tunes, and allow music to be able to be part of the inspiration. Music, again, is a kind of communication, which is not. It is a kind of communication. It's a kind of communication which is nonverbal and which can reach things which are beyond verbal, right? If you think about words are great at conveying ideas, but music, laughter, and tears, the nonverbal ways that we communicate, are great at conveying emotion and stuff that lies underneath ideas. And so in ways, it's just as much a form of communication, it's just deeper.
Yeah.
So a way of deepening prayer, which is words and ideas, right, is even prayer itself, the words and ideas have an aspect of song. Ask yourself, why is it that the rabbis insisted on including poetry in prayers? Poetry is so hard to understand. It's bad enough that it's Hebrew. I have to understand the poetry also. Just say what you want to say. The answer is because the rabbis, even in the prayers themselves, are trying to get to those deeper levels of communication. Poetry is a kind of song. The beauty of poetry, I'm a fan of Emily Dickinson, but whatever your poet, right, is that it's a deeper level of communication. It gets beyond ideas to the stuff that lies underneath ideas, to the emotions, to the spirit of things, to the inner world of things. And the rabbis were trying to get there in prayer. So even the words have a song-like quality. If you can actually put them to music, you can deepen it further. So I think bringing some music into prayer is a fantastic idea too.
Absolutely. And I think one of my longer term ambitions is to explore how we can push the boundaries a little bit of Jewish music and explore attaching some other genres to the Jewish music tradition.
And along those lines, one of the things that I found inspirational yesterday, the Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs had a beautiful live webinar which he hosted with Sivan Raham Meir hosted it with Rabbi Sachs and with Ishai Ribo. Ishai Ribo is an Orthodox singer out there who's had some crossover appeal into the general Israeli populace.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a fantastic thing, which was basically a conversation between Rabbi Sachs and Ishai Ribo about the meaning of songs. And Rabbi Sachs kind of provided his sort of commentary and his thoughts and ideas and kind of held forth for about 15 minutes on certain ideas. And then Yishai would sing a song and then they'd do it over again. And to me, that's a great kind of way to begin that sort of creative approach of pairing concepts with song, I think I found wonderful, and
Totally.
I'd like to see more.
And do you think that's something we could bring into the communal prayer service itself again once we start going back to shul? Obviously not on Shabbat, but
Sure, I think it would be great, and I think we've been taking baby steps in that direction. There's Kalbach Minyanim on Friday nights that have become very popular, but I think the notion of a Kalbach Minyan 2.0, which isn't just songs, but is a song together with commentary, right, is beautiful. Sometimes we do it now, ironically, on Tisha B'Av.
Is there any reason
right?
not to use instruments?
What's that?
Is there any reason we can't use instruments?
Is historically as a no on Shabbos.
No, not Shabbos. I'm saying during the week.
Yeah, but during the week, yeah, I think that'd be a fascinating thing. And I've seen beautiful examples of it. It's a shul in Riverdale that does Hallel now and then with instruments. With the Shliach Tzibur, which is gorgeous to watch, and absolutely, I'm all in favor of that. Together with a prayer service with extended commentary, it's people just you have to plan around it. It's not something to do every day, but I think it's a special kind of event that can be planned for, and I think can be wonderful.
I think it needs real thought, and I think it's something that I want to give more thought to. And I think it's really something that we do need to, as you say, have upgrade a little bit. I don't know whether previous generations had an easier time with it than we do. I don't know, but I just feel like there's more. We have more options now. There's more that can be done, and maybe we're in a slightly a generation with slightly shorter attention spans and that have lots of different things are competing for their attention, and maybe we need it to take it to, raise our game a little bit.
Yep, I think that's certainly possible.
Well, Rabbi Fohrman, thank you so much. It's always fascinating to speak to you. Always help me reframe my perspectives on issues. So I'm really grateful for your time, and as always, hope we'll have another opportunity to do this. But thank you so much for taking your time out to do this with us.
Great to be here with you, and I thank you for having me on, and best regards to all of your listeners.
Thank you.
To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.